The savage humans would tear Gruss limb from limb if they ever found him, Daddy Zor thought as he tucked in his little Ventaxian son, who was begging for a scary story with his 4 little blue arms clutching the bedsheets. "Daddy, tell me a really scary story," Gruss chirped, his big glassy eyes wide with anticipation. The young Ventaxian boy always loved a spine-tingling tale before bed. Zor sighed, his battle scars aching as he sat on the edge of the small bed. As a hardened Ventaxian soldier, he had seen his share of horrors, but nothing chilled him to the core like the memory of the humans, those pale, pinkish, bipedal apes with an unquenchable bloodlust. He supposed it was time Gruss learned of the monsters that haunted the galaxy. "All right, son. I'll tell you about the most terrifying creatures known to Ventaxian kind, the humans," Zor began, his voice low and serious. "It all started during the Ventaxian-Human War, when our people foolishly tried to take a planet the humans had already claimed." Zor recounted how his squad of 10 elite Ventaxian troopers made planetfall, expecting to easily crush the primitive human resistance. But as soon as their boots hit the dirt, all hell broke loose. A lone human soldier named Ralph Allen burst from the thick alien foliage, built like a tank and covered in gruesome scars. The man hefted a huge shoulder-mounted cannon and opened fire, mowing down Zor's squadmates left and right in a storm of lead and blood. Zor only barely survived the massacre to make it back home. The humans' ferocity and skill at violence defied comprehension. Little Gruss listened in rapt terror, hanging on to every word, realizing that he lived in a universe where such monster existed. And Zor made it very clear, if the humans ever came to Ventaxi, their whole world would burn. Zor's people must remember that grim lesson, or perish under mankind's endless wrath. "Remember, Gruss, never underestimate the humans," Zor said gravely as he tucked in his quivering son, "or it will be the last mistake you ever make. Now sleep tight, little one." With that, Zor turned out the light and left Gruss to the mercy of his imagination and to troubled dreams of scarred, pink-skinned horrors hungry for innocent blue blood. Zor's voice lowered to a hoarse whisper as he recounted the darkest day of the Ventaxian-Human War. He told Gruss how the Ventaxian Armada, thousands of ships strong, descended upon the human colony of New Terra, determined to crush the upstart race once and for all. The Ventaxian commanders were utterly convinced of their superiority, with their gleaming warships bristling with advanced weaponry. But the humans were ready for them. Admiral Marcus Garrett, a grizzled veteran of countless battles, had laid a trap. As the Ventaxian fleet closed in, Garrett's ships suddenly broke formation, scattering in all directions. The Ventaxians, confused, tried to give chase, only to be ambushed by human vessels that seemed to melt out of the void of space. Zor stood on the bridge of his ship, barking orders as the battle raged around him. Explosions lit up the void as human ships, though outnumbered, danced around the clumsier Ventaxian craft with ease. Garrett's flagship, the Indomitable, a monstrous dreadnought, suddenly burst from the heart of a nebula, its guns blazing. It charged directly into the center of the Ventaxian line, blasting ships to atoms left and right. Then came the boarding parties. Human marines encased in hulking power armor and wielding weapons that spat sun-hot plasma, smashed into the hulls of Ventaxian vessels. They rampaged through the corridors, gunning down Ventaxian crew without mercy. Zor watched the video feeds in horror as an all-too-familiar face appeared. Ralph Allen, the butcher of Zor's old squad, now leading the human attackers. The giant human brute crashed through bulkheads like they were paper, his massive gun reducing Ventaxians to bloody smears with every shot. Alarms suddenly blared on Zor's own ship. The humans were coming. Zor watched helplessly as Allen and his monsters tore their way to the bridge, leaving piles of mangled blue corpses in their wake. With no other choice, Zor fled to an escape pod, punching the eject button just as the bridge doors exploded inward. The Ventaxian fleet crumbled. Their beautiful ships were blasted to scrap, venting atmosphere and corpses into the void. The Indomitable smashed through their ranks, an unstoppable engine of destruction. Zor could only watch as the humans obliterated his people's last desperate hope for victory. New Terra would remain firmly in human hands. Grus stared up at his father, his eyes huge in his small blue face. "What happened next, Daddy? Did we ever beat the humans?" Zor's voice lowered to a grim tone as he recounted the next brutal chapter in the war against the savage humans. The scene shifted to the barren, rocky world of Zephyrus Prime, where the Ventaxians had dug in deep, desperate to hold on to their last stronghold against the relentless human onslaught. Towering walls of reinforced concrete and bristling gun emplacements loomed over the desolate landscape. Ventaxian soldiers hurried through the trenches and bunkers, checking their plasma rifles with 4 trembling hands. In the command center, buried deep underground, Zor stood over a holographic map of the base, his face grim. He knew the humans were coming. It was only a matter of time. The first sign of the attack was a distant scream, growing louder by the second. Zor's head snapped up just as a panicked voice crackled over the comms. "Incoming dropships! Thousands of them!" The sky darkened as a swarm of angular metal craft descended through the clouds, the roar of their engines drowning out all other sound. The Ventaxian defenses erupted, filling the air with crisscrossing beams of plasma and laser fire. Several dropships exploded in mid-air, raining burning debris onto the rocky ground. But it wasn't enough. Like angry hornets from a kicked nest, human soldiers poured from the surviving dropships, their bulky power armor glinting in the harsh sunlight. They charged across the no-man's land toward the Ventaxian lines, heedless of the withering defensive fire that scythed through their ranks. At the head of the assault was Captain James Hawkins and his infamous Hellhounds, the most feared human unit in the galaxy. Each soldier was a walking tank, their armor bristling with advanced weapons and shrugging off plasma bolts like raindrops. And there at the forefront was a familiar hulking figure, Sergeant Ralph Allen, the butcher of Zor's old squad. The giant human brute hefted an enormous plasma minigun, the spinning barrels glowing white-hot as he poured an unending stream of death into the Ventaxian trenches. Entire squads of Ventaxians were vaporized in an instant, their agonized screams echoing across the battlefield. Zor watched the holographic map in dismay as the human forces punched through his defenses like a fist through wet paper, shrugging off losses that would have broken any Ventaxian unit. The bunkers and gun emplacements held for a time, the Ventaxians fighting with the desperate ferocity of the doomed. But Hawkins's Hellhounds were relentless, blasting apart Ferrocrete with concentrated plasma fire and crushing Ventaxian resistance with brutal efficiency. Allen was a one-man army, wading through the trenches like an unstoppable force of nature, leaving a trail of mangled blue corpses in his wake. Plasma bolts pinged off his armor like hail as he advanced inexorably toward the heart of the base. Zor clenched his fists, his eyes hard. He knew there was only one way this could end. The humans would not be satisfied until every last Ventaxian on Zephyrus Prime was dead, or worse, captured for interrogation and torture. There would be no mercy, no quarter given. He turned to his bodyguards, the last of his loyal soldiers. "We make our stand here," he growled, drawing his plasma pistol. "We will show these human monsters the true strength of the Ventaxian spirit." And so as the human forces stormed into the depths of the base, Zor and his soldiers met them head-on in a desperate last stand. The tunnels echoed with the screech of plasma fire and the dying screams of Ventaxian and human alike. Zor fought like a cornered beast, his forearms a blur as he grappled with armored human soldiers and put plasma bolts through their visors at point-blank range. But it was all for naught. One by one, Zor's bodyguards fell, overwhelmed by the sheer ferocity and firepower of the human assault, and then, from the smoke and chaos, emerged the towering figure of Ralph Allen, his armor dented and scorched, but still very much intact. Zor snarled in defiance, raising his pistol, only for Allen to smack it away contemptuously and seize the Ventaxian commander by the throat with one gigantic, gauntleted hand. Zor lashed out with all 4 fists, pummeling Allen's armor, but it was like striking a mountain. With a final sickening crunch, Allen crushed Zor's windpipe and hoisted his broken body aloft like a gory trophy, Zor's 4 limbs dangling limply. The Ventaxian commander's death marked the end of organized resistance on Zephyrus Prime. Grus stared up at his father with wide, horrified eyes. Did we lose the war then, Daddy?" he asked in a small voice. Zor's face was grim, the memory of that awful defeat still fresh and painful. He looked down at his son, seeing the fear and confusion in those innocent eyes. Zor shook his head gravely, his eyes haunted by the memories of the war's darkest days. "No, Grus, the war was far from over," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "The Ventaxians, beaten and desperate, resorted to the unthinkable." The scene shifted to the verdant human colony of Eden Prime, a peaceful world of sprawling cities and lush farmland. Zor described how a Ventaxian bioweapon, a hideous plague engineered in secret labs, was unleashed upon the unsuspecting population. The virus spread like wildfire, causing grotesque mutations and agonizing deaths. Within days, millions lay dead or dying, their bodies piled in the streets as the infrastructure collapsed. The once thriving cities became a nightmarish landscape of festering corpses and crumbling buildings. Farms withered, their crops choked by the vile miasma that clung to the land. Eden Prime, once a shining jewel of human civilization, was reduced to a corpse-strewn hellscape, uninhabitable for centuries to come. Zor's voice shook as he recounted the human retaliation, a rain of nuclear fire that scoured the Ventaxian homeworld. "I watched from an evacuation ship as our cities burned," he whispered, his eyes distant. The sky was choked with ash and the smoke of burning flesh. Billions died in an instant, vaporized by the humans' merciless vengeance. The Ventaxian homeworld, once a proud and advanced civilization, was reduced to a radioactive wasteland in a matter of hours. The great cities, towering spires of gleaming metal and crystal, melted like candle wax under the onslaught of nuclear fire. The lush forests and grasslands ignited like tinder, the conflagration visible from orbit. Zor spoke of the harrowing escape, huddled in an overcrowded ship with the tattered remnants of his people, watching their world die through the viewports. Many went mad with grief, hurling themselves into the void, unable to bear the loss. In the aftermath, both humans and Ventaxians were left shattered and reeling, their populations decimated, and their worlds in ruins. Zor learned of the fate of Ralph Allen, the human who had haunted his nightmares for so long. "Allen lost everything when Eden Prime burned," Zor said softly. "His family, his home, his reason to live. They say he's a broken man now, drowning his pain in drink, a shell of the warrior he once was." Zor himself had lost all he held dear, his mate, his clutch siblings, his parents. All had perished in the nuclear fire, their ashes mingling with the radioactive dust that choked the ruined homeworld. He was left alone, forever haunted by the horrors he had witnessed, the weight of survival heavy on his shoulders. Grus, his eyes wide and shimmering with tears, asked in a trembling voice, Will the humans come back, Daddy? Will there be another war?" Zor pulled his son close, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I hope not, my son. But if they do, we will be ready. We will never forget the lessons of the past, and we will do whatever it takes to survive, even if it means becoming monsters ourselves." With a heavy heart, Zor tucked Grus back into bed, kissing him gently on the forehead. He turned off the light, plunging the room into darkness, and left his son to his troubled dreams. As Grus drifted into a fitful sleep, his young mind swirled with nightmarish visions of the war, cities crumbling under nuclear fire, worlds choked with corpses, and the hollow, haunted eyes of the survivors. He couldn't shake the feeling that, somewhere out there in the vast expanse of space, the embers of hatred still smoldered between human and Ventaxian. And he feared that one day those embers would ignite once again, plunging the galaxy into the fires of war eternal. The question lingered like a dark spectre in his dreams. Could there ever truly be peace between two races who had inflicted such horrors upon each other? Or was the universe destined to forever echo with the screams of the dying and the lamentations of the survivors, a grim symphony with no end? Years melted into decades as the shattered remnants of humanity and the Ventaxians struggled to rebuild from the ashes of their ruinous war. Grus, the little boy who once listened in rapt terror to his father's tales of the dreaded human monsters, now stood tall and proud as a commander in the Ventaxian defense fleet. His forearms, once clutched in fear at his bedsheets, now danced across the command console of his sleek, deadly warship. A proximity alert chimed, stirring Gruss from his thoughts. They were approaching Zeta Reticuli 4, an uncharted world at the fringes of known space. Initial scans showed it to be a desolate, rocky hellscape, whipped by howling winds that carried clouds of abrasive silica dust. Yet something had drawn them here, a faint, flickering distress beacon, barely detectable among the electromagnetic interference from the turbulent atmosphere. "So we're picking up a signal from the surface," Gruss's sensor officer reported, her voice tentative. It looks like an old Earth Confederation frequency." Gruss felt a cold spike of dread in his gut. The war had been over for years, but the old hatreds died hard. What were humans doing out here, in the arse end of the galaxy? "Bring us in," he ordered, his voice harder than he intended. "And ready the weapons, this could be a trap." The ship knifed through the atmosphere, the hull groaning as the violent winds battered its armored flanks. Gruss watched the forward view screen intently as the broken landscape resolved into view, a shattered hellscape of jutting obsidian spires and yawning chasms. And there, half buried in the shifting dunes, was the unmistakable wreckage of a human vessel. It was an old model, a relic from the early days of the war, its hull pitted and scarred by micrometeorite impacts and laser fire. One of the engine nacelles had been shorn clean off, and the exposed decks gaped open to the howling sky, like the ribcage of some long-dead leviathan. "Take us down," Gruss said grimly. "Deploy the landing party, but stay sharp. There may still be survivors." The ship touched down in a billowing cloud of dust, the landing ramp slamming down with a pneumatic hiss. Gruss was the first one out, his boots crunching on the jagged obsidian shards that littered the ground. His men fanned out behind him, their plasma rifles sweeping the perimeter, the barrels glowing with barely restrained energy. The distress beacon was still pulsing, a fading rhythm that seemed to gasp its last even as they approached. Gruss followed it into the wreckage, clambering over twisted metal and shattered bulkheads, the acrid stench of burnt insulation and stale recycled air assaulting his nostrils. And there, in the shattered remnants of the medical bay, he found him, a lone human figure slumped against the far wall, his once mighty frame wasted and atrophied. Shreds of an ancient spacesuit still clung to his emaciated body, the fabric rotted and brittle with age. One leg was twisted at an impossible angle, the bone jutting through the desiccated flesh. Gruss approached cautiously, his rifle trained on the man's chest. The human's head lolled weakly, his rheumy eyes struggling to focus. Gruss nearly recoiled in shock as he saw the man's face, a visage seared into his memory since childhood. It was Ralph Allen, the butcher of Zephyrus Prime, the bane of Ventaxians, the monster from Gruss's father's stories, but no longer the unstoppable force of nature in Gruss's youthful imaginings. Now he was just a broken old man, clinging to the last tattered shreds of life. Allen coughed, a liquid rattled deep in his chest. Never thought I'd see the day," he rasped, his voice thin and reedy. "A four-armed freak standing over me at the end of all things." Gruss's finger tightened on the trigger. It would be so easy to put a bolt of plasma through the man's skull and avenge the billions he had slaughtered. But something stayed his hand. This wasn't a fearsome warrior. This was a pitiful wreck, a husk of a man awaiting the release of death. "Why are you here, human?" Gruss demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. "What is this place?" Allen laughed, a gasping wheeze that devolved into a fit of coughing. "Eden 2, he said when he could speak again. "Supposed to be a new beginning, a chance for something better." He gestured weakly at the wreckage around them, his hand trembling with the effort. "But we brought the war with us, the hate, the fear. It ate us alive." Gruss looked around, seeing the wreckage with new eyes. This wasn't a crash site, it was a tomb, a monument to humanity's unrelenting self-destruction. Allen was staring at him, a strange intensity in his watery eyes. You're "You're different, aren't you?" he whispered. Not like the others." Gruss didn't answer. He didn't know how to. All his life he had been taught to fear this man, to hate him with every fibre of his being. But now, looking at him, all he felt was pity and a strange, unsettling kinship. "You have a chance, Ventaxian," Alan said, his voice fading. "A chance to be better than us. Don't make the same mistakes. Don't let the hate consume you." His eyes fluttered closed, his chest rising and falling in shallow, laboured breaths. "Be the change," he whispered, his voice barely audible now. Be the change the universe needs." And with that, Ralph Allen, the scourge of the Ventaxian race, the monster of Gruss's childhood, breathed his last. Gruss stood there for a long moment, staring down at the man's lifeless form, his mind reeling. All his life he had been taught that humans were the enemy, that they were savage, bloodthirsty creatures, hell-bent on the destruction of his people. But now, standing here, over the broken body of the most feared human of them all, he realized the truth. They were all victims, human and Ventaxian alike, trapped in an endless cycle of hate and vengeance, doomed to repeat the same bloody mistakes over and over until there was nothing left but ashes and echoes. A strange calm settled over Gruss, a sense of purpose unlike anything he had ever known. He turned to his men, who were watching him with a mix of confusion and unease. "Gather the body," he said, his voice steady. "We're giving him a proper burial. Here on this world he tried to make a new beginning." His men hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. Burying a human, especially this human, went against everything they had ever been taught. But Gruss was resolute. "We have to be better," he said, echoing Alan's dying words. "We have to break the cycle. If we don't, there will be nothing left but bones and dust." Slowly, hesitantly, his men obeyed. They wrapped Alan's body in a tattered remnant of the Ventaxian flag, the fabric stained and faded from years of exposure. They carried him out into the howling winds, to a small rise overlooking the wreckage of his failed dream. There, under the cold light of alien stars, they laid Ralph Allen to rest, the man who had been their greatest enemy, and perhaps, in the end, their greatest teacher. Gruss stood over the grave, his head bowed, his mind whirling with the implications of this moment. He knew with a certainty that shook him to his core that nothing would ever be the same. The road ahead would be long and hard, fraught with struggle and setback. There would be those on both sides who clung to the old hatreds, who refused to let go of the bloody past. But Gruss knew, as he had never known anything before, that he had to try. For his people, for the humans, for the future of the galaxy itself, he had to be the change. He had to find a way to build bridges instead of bunkers, to sow seeds of peace instead of fields of bones. It would be the hardest thing he had ever done, but as he stood there under the cold light of alien stars, he knew it was the only thing worth doing. He turned to his men, his eyes alight with a new fire. "Let's go home," he said, his voice ringing with quiet conviction. "We have work to do." You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.